This week's Four Questions Journalist Spotlight is brought to you by Leff's Atlanta Media, Atlanta's best journalist database. Subscribe at leffsatlantamedia.com.
Welcome to the next edition of the Four Questions Journalist Spotlight. We are talking today with Chuck Reece.
Hey,
with
Mitch.
Salvation South. Good morning, Chuck. How are you?
I can't complain, Mitch. It's Friday, and I feel good about that.
I've tried complaining, and no one seems to care, so I'm just not going to do it anymore.
Yeah.
So Chuck and I go way back, and I threatened him with I'm going to find a really old picture of when he and I were working on the Coca-Cola Olympic City attraction back in the mid-90s, leading up to the Centennial Olympic Games here in Atlanta. And I'm going to post it and then make people try to figure out which one is Chuck in that picture.
I don't know. It might not be too hard.
Yeah, maybe not. All right. So Chuck, you have a publication called Salvation South, and I want to talk about that a little bit. But let's do this. Let's start with kind of give me a little bit of background about kind of some of the places you've worked and how you kind of made your way to this place where Salvation South is your focus today.
Well, I tell everybody I kind of have a checkered past. I did, after I got out of journalism school, I got my first journalism job actually when I was 15 years old on the weekly newspaper in my hometown, and went to journalism school and got into magazine writing and wrote primarily for business magazines for about 8 years, and then wound up in politics for a while. I was Governor Zell Miller's press secretary, here in Georgia, for about 2.5 years, I believe. And then when the Georgia lottery started up, I ran communications there for about 1.5 years. And then after that wound up at the Coca-Cola Company in corporate communications for 5 years, which led to me working in the agency business in New York. After that, I did solo corporate communications consulting, speech writing, that kind of thing, for about 11 years until I started a different publication in 2013 with some partners. And then in 2020, those partners and I kind of broke up. And in 2021, my wife and I, who was my partner in this business, launched Salvation South.
You can say her name. That's all right.
Stacy.
Okay, there you go.
She's wonderful, right?
Yeah,
and
she is.
I mean, I tend to writing and to editing other people's writing, and literally everything else she does. So
she's in charge of the T-shirts and swag and all that.
All of that, and she's also our primary illustrator these days.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Salvation South, is it print, online, or both?
It is online only.
Yep.
We come out with 3 new pieces of writing every Sunday. If you join what we call our family circle, which is sort of like a subscription, only we don't operate behind a paywall, you get early access to our lead story on Fridays. And everything comes out on Sunday morning because we like the idea of giving people some good Sunday reading that perhaps doesn't, we're not really driven by the news cycle.
Yeah, and, you guys aren't that this happened today or this happened yesterday.
Not at all.
At all.
I mean,
yeah.
For instance, we just got back from a 2-week hiatus from vacation, and we're coming out this weekend with our lead story is a great essay, and it's a remembrance of a Mississippi writer named Brad Watson who died in 2020, but there is this week on Tuesday a posthumous collection of his short stories came out. He got pretty famous with a novel in 2016 called Miss Jane, which was, oh God, man, such an amazing book. that follows a Mississippi woman with a peculiar circumstance of birth, from her birth, her death.
Now I'm intrigued. Okay.
Yeah, and
That's a good tease, Chuck.
yeah, and one of Brad's students, because he also taught writing, is an Alabama novelist named Caleb Johnson. So we're publishing Caleb's remembrance of his mentor, and we've got a really interesting piece from a woman who grew up in Cajun country in Louisiana, and now is an anthropologist working in Germany. And she sort of explores how the South either deals or doesn't deal with its dark past versus how Germany deals or doesn't deal with its dark past. And it's a really interesting story.
That's very that is very interesting. Yeah, because Germany kind of has a unique way of dealing with it, and has dealt with it, I think, very well.
Yeah, but it's interesting, as she notes in the story, to see how some of the older, right-wing fascistic elements of the culture seem to be making a resurgence over there. And,
yeah.
But they have dealt with it far more directly than the South has ever dealt with its, original sin of slavery.
Right. So how do you, if someone said, and I'm going to make you give me the 30-second, what is Salvation South focus on? What's the mission?
Well, we focus on stories, and well, not just stories, because we also publish some poetry, and we run some short documentary films from time to time too. But we're looking at any kind of storytelling that really essentially does one of two things, or both at the same time. The first is to celebrate the the culture of the South, food, music, literature, all of that. And two, things that sort of reckon with the difficulties of the South's past, and I love it when I get something that I feel like does both at the same time. Because we won't live, we want to entertain people, and we want them, we want to give them food for thought.
And how do you define the South geographically?
I've been asked that question for a long time, because I've been working at one publication or another that focuses on that. And the best way I figured out to describe it was something I found back in the early teens. And it was the work of a linguistics professor, and I can't remember what university this person was from, but they had done a survey to document the frequency with which the word y'all is used state by state.
All right.
And if you mapped higher incidences of the use of the word y'all on a map of the United States, what you get is a line that goes roughly from like the middle of Maryland on the East Coast down in an arc through East Texas. And so I always figured that was the best way to do it. But, the thing about it is, I learned later that you miss West Virginia or most of it when you do that.
Okay.
And
well, that's not good.
The West Virginia culture is very Southern, because, Appalachian culture is Southern culture. So I think it's defined by geography. It's defined by the mountain ranges coming down, from West Virginia, into, the Piedmont and the deep South states of, Louisiana, and it spreads over into Arkansas too, because, you meet 3 or 4 people from Arkansas, and you figure out pretty quick, that that's part of the South too.
Yeah, I guess for me, it's always the Texas piece has always been a little bit of a kind of that. Is Texas really the South? That's a little bit of that's always been kind of that. consternation piece for me is I don't know about Texas.
Well, one of the things I've discovered over, occasionally writing about things in Texas over times is like if you get out into West Texas, there's nothing Southern about it. That is a purely Western culture.
Okay.
Right.
Right.
And Central Texas, it's pretty much the same way. But East Texas, when you get over near Louisiana and that kind of stuff, it's that culture is distinctly Southern in a lot of ways. But, the weird thing is that Texans in general sort of think of themselves as a nation. Have you ever seen
there is
stickers, that say like the Republic of Texas or whatever.
Yep.
So the Texans are weird to start with.
Yeah. All right. We can do a whole segment on Texas.
Yeah, we could.
We'll do another show about Texas.
All
right. So are there, you mentioned a couple of things. Are there topics that you want to cover that kind of are on your radar? You think, okay, this is on my radar for the next 6 months, the next year. I want to get to this.
That happens. I would say, planned coverage like that is only about 10% of what we wind up publishing at the end of the day. Most everything we do is driven by submissions. And it feels like that people have gotten a feel over the last 2.5 years that we've been around about what kind of things work for us. Like, I would say our mix right now is probably about 20% journalism, probably 45 to 50% personal essays, but essays that are on really interesting, specifically Southern topics, like the ones that we were talking about that we were publishing this week. I'm probably 15% poetry now, because there's been, like, I have discovered, we never meant to publish poetry in Salvation South, but poets began submitting it, and I discovered, and it's not really a surprise when you think about it, what a rich poetic landscape the South actually is. And there are some very, topical things. I mean, people deal with the difficult issues of the South through poetry quite frequently. One case in point I always like to talk about is a woman named Jacqueline Allen Trimble, who is a poet from Montgomery, Alabama, who literally grew up at sort of the metaphorical address of everybody in the South. She grew up at the corner of Rosa Parks Avenue and Jefferson Davis Avenue in Montgomery.
Okay. Yeah, that'll do it.
Yeah, and she is African American. She runs the Literature and Languages Department at Alabama State, the HBCU down there in Montgomery, and after the state of Florida came out with its revised African American history curriculum for high school students last year, that famously made sure that teachers mentioned the valuable skills that slaves supposedly learned. And it was total revisionist history. She sent me a poem that we published back in November, that was the title of which was A Note to Florida Legislators on the Skills My Ancestors Allegedly Received During the Period of Enslavement.
God.
And it was, I like, Jackie and I have become friends, and I like to tell her that I think her work sort of hits people in the head with like the cast iron skillet of truth.
Yeah.
And, she does remarkable work. And we've begun to publish some more fiction too, which is really interesting, and I don't know. We look at the submissions and we try our best to keep up with them, and we pick the stuff that feels like it has the right vibe.
And so where can people find Salvation South? SalvationSouth.com.
Right. You can also, search your favorite, where you get your favorite podcasts, as they say. We have a podcast, and every Friday I do a 3.5 minute commentary for the Georgia Public Broadcasting Radio Network that runs at 7:45 during morning edition, and then again at 4:45 during All Things Considered.
Yep.
And those commentaries become part of our podcast feed. But once a month since last fall, we have been doing longer pieces about, they're sort of produced journalistic. They're like audio magazine pieces,
Right,
essentially.
right. All right. So this next couple of questions is a little bit of the lightning round. So first question is, what is the coolest thing about Chuck that people might not know?
Oh my God.
It could be a hobby. It could be something you collect, certain talent, anything like that.
Honestly, it was having the great good fortune of being in college at the University of Georgia when all the big music scene began happening there in the early 1980s. I got to, I have many memories of seeing REM for 50 cents at nightclubs in Athens, and to be friends with all the people who were part of that really amazingly creative thing. That's like, I don't know. I feel like that's the coolest thing about me. I don't know what other people think.
All right. So what's either the last book you've read or the last podcast you listened to? And the podcast cannot be one of your own podcasts.
Okay. I'll tell you. Can I tell you both?
Sure.
The last podcast that I listened to is called For People, FOR, with Bishop Rob Wright. Bishop Rob Wright is the bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of Atlanta, and he is the first African American cleric ever to hold that position. And he has a lot of really interesting things to say. And the last book I read here, you're going to have to give me a second to consult Goodreads. I read a ridiculous amount of books, and I will tell you.
This is where I play the music from Jeopardy while we're
right. I mean, if it was just okay. The last book that I read was My Sunshine Away by M.O. Walsh, who runs the creative writing program at the University of New Orleans. And another one of his books called The Big Door Prize got made into an Apple TV Plus series that aired earlier this year.
All right. Favorite local restaurant?
Kimball House.
Kimball House. Okay.
Shadow of a doubt. Indicator.
Favorite local getaway?
Oh, local getaway.
And that could be just someplace, it could be a lake, the woods, someplace you like to walk, someplace you like to get when you don't want to be working.
I live in Clarkston, the Ellis Island of the South,
right?
Just east of Decatur. and we have a lovely little nature preserve that has a tiny parking lot right on East Ponce de Leon Avenue. And there's, you walk down pretty deep into the woods, and it's so still and so beautiful. And I love that place because I can get there really quickly. I can walk there in about 15 minutes.
Does that secret place have a name?
Yeah, but I forget.
All right. Well, we'll just call it that park off East Ponce. All right.
That's right.
Okay. Favorite guilty pleasure?
My favorite guilty pleasure is apple cobbler.
Okay.
Wherever I can get it.
All right.
I'm just, I come from LJ, which is the apple capital of Georgia. And, a lot of people talk about how they love peach cobbler in the springtime. I go more for the apple cobbler.
I do. I make a really good apple cobbler, usually when I'm camping.
Oh, sweet.
But I do a Dutch oven. But when I'm at home and I'm not cooking for kids, I add a little whiskey to it, which I think makes all the difference.
A little bourbon never hurt.
Bourbon's okay.
And an apple dessert.
What's your favorite non-work hobby?
Oh, I don't have time for honest. Here,
that sounds familiar, Chuck.
My favorite non-work hobby is also kind of a work hobby. I'm like an inveterate reader, and I read. I don't know. I probably read an average of somewhere between 60 and 75 books a year, and the fact that it happens to be, like I pick up things I can use for work is great, but I would do it anyway. You put me, in a really comfy chair or out on the front porch with the fan blowing on me, and ideally in a thunderstorm and a book, I'm happier.
That sounds like a good place to be. We have been talking with Chuck Reece, who is the owner, founder, publisher of Salvation South, co-founder.
Stacey, right.
Wait, what's your wife's name?
Stacy.
What's her name? Say it again.
Stacy. Stacy, no E. Stacy Reece.
All right, there we go. Well, we'll put her picture up here too.
Well, you should.
Yeah, we should. Chuck, thank you so much for taking some time. Appreciate it. And tune in next week, or the week after next, for another edition of our 4 Questions Journalist Spotlight. As always, you can find the archive on YouTube or on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or iHeartRadio Podcasts, or anywhere you can find podcasts, audio, video, whichever way you like to take your podcasts. And if you want to check out our Leff's Atlanta Media database of journalists, go to leffsatlantamedia.com. And if you're on whatever podcast platform you're on now, click that subscribe button now, and we will see you next week. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Chuck.
Thanks for having me, Mitch. I really do appreciate it.